Hello and welcome back to another episode. I am so excited to talk to you today because it's all about things you didn't know you needed, private property edition. Now, it's no secret when it comes to private property weddings and planning them, there is a multitude of things to consider because yes, you're quite often building a wedding from literally the ground up. You've got no infrastructure existing. You've got nothing. You have to build this thing from the ground up. So there's a lot of common things that I see in the industry that get forgotten or missed when couples are planning a wedding at home on their own private property wedding. Now, I will speak to this a bit later in the episode, but we have actually got good news. We have a whole ebook, which is free to download, which is your complete guide to planning a private property wedding. So if that is of interest to you, I will pop the link here. Do yourself a favor and go and download it for free. But today we're talking about the things that most commonly get missed, the things you didn't know you needed. Let's dive in. Okay, next up is power supply and generators. Now, I would even go a step further here and say even include a backup generator, because the last thing you want is for one to fail and then you've got nothing up your sleeve just in case. So write that down, power supply and backup generators. So also with this, I think you need to include and factor in whether you're needing extension leads, extra long extension leads to, have people being able to plug in and access that power. So that sort of goes for your caterers, your musicians. Even ask your celebrant if they require power. A lot of them do have their own PA system and battery operated ones too, which is fantastic. I strongly advise that option over running, multiple long extension leads for long distances. I don't recommend that. Battery operated PA systems for celebrants. Even heating and cooling and musicians and things like that. So you need to be able to make sure that wherever your power supply is, you have to factor in, okay, well, where is my band going to position themselves for the ceremony and the reception? Where is my celebrant going to be? Where is my catering setting up? And the distances that they are from that power supply, because you're going to need ample extension leads. If they can supply their own, fantastic. But this is when it's important to plan that layout, I suppose, as to how that power is going to be accessible, and then having that backup generator. In terms of, I will be honest and say I've had the question before in terms of how many outlets do you need in order to not overpower the supply. We don't want that happening. I'm not an electrician, so I don't know that answer. I will be honest there. But I advise that you reach out to a professional electrician to find out that, or even where you hire your generators from. They'll be able to advise a little bit on that, because you don't want to overpower the system either. That is really important too. So generators, backup generators, and work out your power supply. Who needs that power supply? Where are they going to be? In terms of the distance from that power supply, and working out your extension leads and access to that power, so you accommodate them well, but also not over compensate and overpower the whole grid. We don't want that happening either. And an extra little tip here is test everything before you walk away and put a tick next to it. If you've got everything set up on the day and you've got your backup power supply, you've got your leads running and everything, please, please, please do a test and make sure that the power is working when it needs to reach the person over here or catering over here. The lights are all on, the music is sounding great. Test, because you want to make sure that that's all working at least a day or two before the wedding. So if it isn't, you've got the time up your sleeve to rectify that, to fix that issue. Whereas if you leave testing to the morning of or just hours before, it's going to be a bit hectic trying to figure that out. That's where I guess you're leaving the gate open for stress to come in. And if you don't have a professional planner, stylist, or coordinator on board to help handle those things, then it's going to be really hard to think quickly on your feet in those moments. And you don't want to leave that responsibility to your poor family and friends who should be getting ready to see you walk down the aisle. So test everything, at least a day or two prior, please. Number 3 is bins and waste management. Now, I did say that there is a non-glamorous side to the wedding industry, and look, I suppose this is part of it, but you do really need to consider bin placement and the waste management. So I'll dive into that a little bit further. So we don't want your wedding to turn into the likes of another fire festival. If you haven't seen that documentary on Netflix, go and watch it. But basically, it's just a tip site because it hasn't been considered about bins and waste management. And we really, really don't want that on your wedding day, right? So in order to avoid that, you need to, in your planning, and I guess match this to your guest list ratio as well, but place bins around the place so people can easily put their rubbish in. That is really super important, especially for cocktail style weddings, because you've got roaming food and drinks happening all the time, and then people are eating, and then what do they do with it? And then they start to just put them on a bar table that they're standing at. But before you know it, if you've got over 100 guests and everybody's doing it, all the tables are full with rubbish, but they need somewhere to sit. So then it goes to the floor. So being able to properly map out where your guests are going to be situated for most of the night and that flow of the floor plan, I would place the bins around there. That is number 1. Number 2 is the waste management side of that. And by that, I mean, somebody's got to empty the bins too, right? So you think about beer bottles and things like that, they fill bins really, really quickly. So if your catering or bar service staff cover this is fantastic. If not, I would strongly suggest mentioning it to a planner or a coordinator that you have on site too, or designating somebody on the night to be able to constantly empty the bins and refill them. Just having liners in the bins, for example, and being able to quickly tie them up, replace it, and dispose of the rubbish somewhere else. But you can't forget about that because they're just going to keep filling and filling and filling. And then what? It's still going to turn into a bit of a tip site because once they're full, the rubbish just goes all over the ground. So in that waste management plan, what's really great is to, depending on your council, I know at the moment, in terms of recycling, there is new bins that are rolling out that are glassware only. But what I've seen on private properties, which is really helpful, is if you hire some skips designated for waste, glassware and recycling, and divvy those up, separate those up, so you're making sure that you're doing the right thing there. If you can't have access to skips, trailers work really well too. So having, again, I guess them clearly labelled, or letting the staff know, the catering and the beverage staff as well know that these are the sections for waste, general waste, for glassware and for recycling. But having somebody or even a couple of people designated to manage that waste and dispose of it and refill the bin liners is something that goes amiss really, really often. Now, I will say where you have that waste management, so those skip bins or the trailers, they usually are best situated away from the wedding. Not, so it's a massive trek to get there, but a way that you're not going to have to deal with the sights or smells of that during the wedding. We don't want that interfering. And just on that, I will touch on lighting soon, but make sure that area is well lit. Just because it might be behind a building or somewhere, people through the night still need to access that, and you don't want any tripping hazards or anything like that happening either. So have it well lit, and work out your bin placement and work that out in relation to your floor plan and the flow that your guests will be making I guess, the journey throughout the space. And assigning people or hiring people to make sure they're covering the management of that waste and having somewhere for that waste management to go. So a skip bin or trailers as well, that if you're planning on doing a tip run or something yourself in the coming days afterwards, that is popular on private property weddings, but making sure all of those management and bins are covered. Number 4 is car parking and easy vehicle access. So I'm going to split this up into 2 parts here for you. So first and foremost, car parking. You need to make sure that there's ample space and a designated space for car parking, and that needs to be well sign written, because you need to make sure that guests can easily identify where they've got to go and where the designated parking area is. Now, where this is on the property, it needs to obviously be accessible in terms of from the entry and exit points of the property, and that's due to OH&S as well. You don't want there being a mad rush if there is an incident. You don't want there being a mad rush of 100 cars leaving a property through one entry and exit point, so consider that. And the proximity that the car park is to the actual wedding itself, because you don't want to have guests having to trek miles and miles and miles to be able to get to your ceremony spot. And then when they move to the reception spot, obviously coming back home, going back to the car. So you're wanting to make sure that it's in a close enough spot to the ceremony and the reception that isn't too far away, but also isn't going to be in the background of all your gorgeous wedding photos. So if you have areas already planned out on the property where you want your ceremony to be, your reception, even where you're after your bridal photos to be, just take a look, even walk through the property yourself physically, and make sure that where you're envisioning the car parking area to be isn't going to then provide this backdrop of cars and shiny mirrors and windscreens from the sun in the backdrops of all of your bridal photos too. So it does take some planning, but if you can nail those things in terms of the position and the location of your parking, then you're not going to have a worry at all. And yes, have that sign written as well. Also have it lit. Lighting here is really important. You've got to think when your guests are leaving for the evening and they're having to walk from the reception space back over to the car park, it needs to be well lit. And you can hire those big tall floodlights from higher places as well. I think they just run on their own generator too, and that is really highly recommended, that just shines all over the car park, but then you also have some lighting leading to the car park as well. So that is car parking. Now, easy vehicle access. So I touched on that before a little bit in terms of the access points for your guests to come in and out, and just making sure that from an OH&S point of view that you have a couple of options there to enter and exit the property just in case of an emergency. But you also need to consider if you're having guests arrive by bus or by coach, or if you're even arriving by a limousine or a specialty vehicle there, then there needs to be a really smooth entry point and turning point. That's really important, a turning point for those larger, longer vehicles to be able to get in and out from. So there's no point in having coaches turn up and drop your guests off at the to the property, right? But then how is it going to get back out? There's nowhere for it to do a comfortable and smooth turning circle to get back out. Then you're forced with, a whole other multitude of problems there. Same with limousines, because they're a longer vehicle too. They need a significant turning circle. So just keeping those things in mind as well. And then in terms of access from a supplier's point of view, in the days or even morning of leading up to the wedding, if you're having trucks and things arriving to set up marquees, dance floors, furniture, you know, all of those bigger pieces often come in trucks, and they also need easy access, and they need easy turning circle ability as well to be able to come in and out of that area. Now, for those suppliers, they are going to want, and any good supplier, when you inquire with them, they will ask what is the access like to that zone where you're needing, for example, a marquee and dance floor setup, because the closer they can get to that section, that area, the better. So keep that in mind too when you're planning out your access, especially for suppliers that are needing to come and set those things up. How close can they get to that location? Because it's going to be a massive tick. They're going to have to, and look, it depends on the supplier, but you know, if they have to trek a long way, then there's going to probably be some more costs involved in labor and who else knows, forklifts. I don't know what they need to be able to get the marquee pieces from their truck over to the location that you're envisioning. So if you can have access that is as close as possible and a great turning circle, because quite often you're going to have multiple trucks and multiple people turning up within the same time window, there needs to be that flow of traffic that's easy for them. You don't want your catering turning up to set up, but then they have to play Tetris and move all of these cars with every other supplier that's turned up as well. If you can make that as free flowing as possible, that is just going to save everything on the back end. Is going to just run so much more smoother, and it's not going to impact on your timeline either. So factoring all of those things in as well. So car parking, have it lit. Pick the location of the car parking so it's not going to interfere with photos of your ceremony, reception or bridal photos, but also not too far away that your guests have to trek a million miles to get to the wedding. Have it lit so you've got a security light, I guess, over the whole car park, but also the journey to that car park in the middle of the night that your guests are going to be taking. And then easy access to and from the property, more than one entry and exit point if you can for OH&S reasons, and making sure a comfortable turning circle is allowed for any trucks, limousines, buses or coaches that need to come and enter the property too. Okay, next, number 5 is lighting, and I have touched on this throughout, but number 5 is so important. Lighting, you cannot go without lighting, especially on a private property wedding, because as I mentioned, you're quite often building it from nothing, from a paddock or literally nothing. And so you've got no existing infrastructure. And as soon as that sun sets, if you can, go out there in the middle of the night at, 10 o'clock at night when you're probably going to be hitting the dance floor. It is going to be pitch black, I guarantee you. So lighting is definitely something that you need to consider and not skimp on. So where exactly do you need the lighting? So you've got to really think about your whole, the whole layout of your wedding day, right? Where your guests' journey are going to start, end, and all of the things in the middle. So lighting your reception, for one, definitely. If you're eating, sitting down at a dinner table, you need to be able to see what you're eating off your plate, right? You need ample lighting for that. Lighting for a dance floor. What I will say is there are marquee companies out there that provide lighting included for all of these things. And they're also available on a dimmer, which I love, especially for a dance floor and even for dinner. So if you're having dinner, you want it sort of really well lit, and then maybe for desserts, you can turn it down a little bit, the lighting down a little bit, and create a different ambience too. So if you can get lighting from marquee suppliers that include dimmers, even better. Okay, so sorry, reception, dance floor, catering tent, like I mentioned before, or wherever the kitchen area is going to be. If it's not in like a household kitchen, if it's separate, that needs to be well lit. Restrooms or toilets need to be well lit. The waste management bins, like I mentioned, they need to be lit. The car park needs to be lit. And also, not only all of those places, but think, how do your guests get from, so the main hub is going to be your reception, right? How are they going to get from their reception to the bins, to the restrooms, to the car park, to the catering tent, and then light those pathways as well? Because you can't just have A and B lit. You need to be able to light the journey there, because in the middle of the night, people aren't going to be able to see, and they're going to have their phones out with their torches. And what I love doing for a private property wedding, when we're doing full planning, coordination, everything, is jotting out like a bird's eye view map, I guess, of the whole property and where we're situating things, because then you can start to map out, where am I going to have the car park situated, where are my caterings going to be, my catering tent, where are my bins and waste management, where will I put the restrooms, because they're all, I guess, not so elegant parts to a wedding, but they're so necessary. So they're not going to be on show in front of everybody to see, but they're a necessity. So even though they might need to stay hidden as such, they still need to have adequate lighting in that area and leading to the way to those areas, which is really important too. And I think definitely that journey piece is really often missed. If you do consider lighting the toilets, for example, it's often that way to the toilets that people don't think about. So that is really, really important. Please do not skimp on lighting. Yes, it's expensive. Yes, it can add up, but you can get creative in ways that you can do it. Hire things, get professionals to help plan that out as well, and making sure that they're covered and tested with a generator and a backup generator, so you're not overloading that power supply. Number 6 is directional signage. So I know I spoke to, I guess, some bits of signage that I feel are necessary and some that aren't, but we're talking about private property weddings specifically today. So in that case, a welcome sign or some sort of sign at the, on the road or the entry point to the property that lets people know that this is where the wedding of such and such is really important. Don't be afraid to go big with that, because you need it to stand out like a street sign, I guess, so it doesn't get missed. So having that, if you will, welcome sign at the front, I do really recommend for a private property wedding. The car parking sign, so direction signage as to where your guests can go to park their car, and suppliers and vendors as well. But where the designated car parking area is, get that sign written. Where guests can enter towards the ceremony. So once they've parked the car and they need some signage to guide them as to where do you want them to go to make their way to the ceremony, that is a really good place to put either like ceremony this way or another version of a welcome sign, but it can be a smaller, I guess like A1 size welcome sign that's situated near a gate or a path or wherever that sort of next entry point is for them. Signage directing where the restrooms are, especially if they're hidden, which I do advise, because they're not the prettiest things to look at, but having some directional signage that's easily noticeable, so guests can find their own way there, and it's just easy. A seating plan, if you're having a sit down dinner style, definitely include some seating plan signage there. Everybody wants to know where they're seated, and people like to sort of suss that out a little bit early on in the night. I don't know why. I think it's a sense of, who am I sitting next to? Oh, I don't want to be placed alone. Like, you know, a bit of that safety net sort of thing. But people love a seating plan sign, and especially if you're having a large wedding, definitely go a seating plan sign, please. I would say weddings under 50 people, you don't really need one. Above, do it. You'll thank me. And if you've got a designated smoking area too, so this is really important, having that sign written is super important too if you're wanting to have that in just one sort of designated area, which you've got maybe some seats and ashtrays and things like that to accommodate smoking guests. That is also really important. So directional signage to just help guide people at a glance. They need to just see that at a glance really quick and know that's where I need to be. I'm busting for the toilet, that's where I need to be. I need to get to the car park, that's where I need to be. You need to make it noticeable. And yeah, you can get creative with it, that it doesn't have to be an ugly thing either, but you can get some really beautiful directional signage pieces designed. We use graphic designers for this, and we love custom ones too. So if you're wanting to have a bit of fun with this, this is an area where you can. If you're wanting to have a little bit of quirkiness in there, you can do like one of those multi-directional street signs. Yeah, you can get really creative. So don't be afraid to do that if that's the direction you're wanting to go in. But if signage isn't that important to you, this is a necessity. So just keep it plain and simple, but make sure that you're including it at the least. Number 7 is cool rooms. Now, 2. Check with your catering and bar service whether or not they provide their own cool rooms or whether they need you to supply them. That's first and foremost, but I always recommend getting a backup cool room. One fails on the day and you have all of your drinks in there, you have your wedding cake in there, you have food, you have ice, and it's a summer wedding, then it's just really stressful to try and find a backup cool room on the day of your wedding. And the thing is as well, this is the second part to cool rooms, get it a couple of days before the wedding and turn it on then, for 2 reasons: to test it, but also it needs time to cool down. You can't just hire in a cool room on, you know, hours before your wedding and turn it on and then put all your food and drinks and ice in there, because that's not how it works. It needs time to cool down to be able to get to that temperature to keep everything safe. So if you're hiring that a couple of days earlier, then you're testing it to make sure it works and you're allowing that time for it to cool down to then place everything in another 24 hours later. Now, by having a second backup one, then I don't think it's a bad thing either, because you can separate your food and your drinks and, you know, a bit of health and safety in that too. But then you've also got that backup up your sleeve. So if one doesn't work, if it gets to the morning of your wedding and you go to check on it and it's cut out in the middle of the night, then organizing a replacement one is probably going to be less stressful, because you've got one backup that's hopefully still running there, or you may not need that replacement anyway. So cool rooms, at least 2. Of course, that depends on the size of your wedding and how much you're needing to store. It also depends on, like I said, touch base with your caterers and your beverage service team and find out whether or not they require cool rooms too, and then make your judgment from there. But they are so important. Have at least 2 and get them at least 2 days out before the wedding, and don't forget to turn them on. It's happened before. Turn them on early. Okay, so number 8 is restrooms. Now, it goes without saying that, yes, it's a necessity. You do need restrooms. But the question that I get asked commonly around this is, yes, but how many? And look, there's no right or wrong answer. But what I will say is put yourself in the shoes of your guests, especially us ladies, because I know that We've all been in that situation before where we've been at a festival or a wedding or an event and you end up having to wait in line for ages waiting to use the bathroom. And there's nothing worse because you're taken away from the thing that you're there for. You're spending your whole time waiting in line at the toilet when you really want to be out on the dance floor, or you're missing out on the beautiful food that's going around or the conversations that are happening that you've had to leave to. So really think about it from that perspective and keeping your guests comfortable. There is nothing worse. And like I said, we've all experienced it. There's nothing worse than waiting in line forever just to use the toilet. So consider that. Now, what we normally suggest is one toilet every 30 to 40 guests, with a minimum of 3 to 4 toilets, a minimum of 3 to 4 toilets. Now, again, the hire companies that you might go through for this, they will be able to advise on what they see fit for your guest numbers. But I would really approach this about from the aspect of keeping your guests comfortable and putting yourself in their shoes too. I'm thinking back to, the festivals and things that you've attended where you've just, spent half the time waiting in line at the toilet. So this is not a glamorous side to the wedding. I know you might be wanting to put more budget into the food or the music or the beautiful styling and flowers, but this is an area that you really can't afford to go small on. Restrooms, don't forget them, and make sure you order enough. Quantity is everything. Okay, number 9 is level ground and no pipes or cables underground. Now, every good hire company, especially marquees, tents, that sort of thing, will ask this question, and so they should, because you need to make sure that the ground is level so that the flooring and the structure of your marquee is obviously pristine. You don't want a dance floor that's on a hill, for example, but also it helps them prepare for if it's not an even ground, then they need to look at ways of, the accessibility to that, and whether they need to cut away some of the earth for that, whether they need to include steps to be able to make sure that the flooring is level, that kind of thing. So if you can have a level ground, even better. If you don't, you really, really need to openly communicate that with your tent and marquee hiring company. Now, second to that is the no pipes or cables running underground. This is a massive, massive safety issue. You need to check this. And if you're unsure whether your property has anything running underground, then dial a dig. I think I've stuffed that up. It's something like that in Australia. You can dial before you dig. That's what it is. Get onto them and they'll be able to help you with that, because if you mess that up, it is a massive, massive health and safety issue. Can you imagine somebody digging into the ground or hammering into the ground and there's live wires or there's plumbing pipes underneath there? That is a whole massive mess that you cannot afford to deal with the week of your wedding, but also a massive health and safety and liability issue. Insurances, it can end in very serious injury as well. I don't need to explain what can happen with live wires and things like that too. So it is something that is necessary, that without a doubt, even when you're first planning your wedding at the start and trying to figure out where on the property that you want to have these big infrastructure pieces like a tent and a marquee, or wherever hammering in the ground needs to happen, you really need to work that out from the get-go, from the outset, and communicate that openly, preferably in writing to your hiring company and your planners, because that is just inexcusable. You have to have that done. Dial before you dig, that's what it's called. They are great at helping you find that out. And property documents as well should be able to help you locate whether or not there's anything underground. But do that research. It is just a non-negotiable, and yeah, you don't want to be digging into the ground, bursting pipes, or even worse, hitting electrical cables and seriously injuring somebody. We don't want that, so check those things out. Okay, last but not least, number 10 is heating and cooling. So depending on the time of year that you're getting married, you're going to want to consider either or sometimes both too, right? So yeah, depending on the season, heating. So I'm talking more for the reception, because once the sun goes down, things change, right? So if you're looking at heating, I would be considering things like gas heaters that could be dotted around, or heating within the marquee itself if it's a sit down dinner. If it's something within the marquee itself, you do need to be super careful with gas. So I would strongly urge you to chat to the marquee or tent provider on that, because there's certain health and safety regulations that come into play there. Chances are they will be able to supply something that is best suited and matched to the regulations for health and safety as well. So yeah, consider that. Gas heating is really good for like outside areas, like a cocktail style. If it's inside the marquee, touch base with the marquee company. And then on the flip side, cooling. So if it's outside, it could be as simple as just having ample umbrella shade as well. So that's not only for your ceremony where your guest is going to be sitting, but also having umbrellas that are dotted around in sort of the cocktail area, around lounges, little bar tables and things like that, where people can find some shade if there's no trees or anything like that. Because in that part of the day, in the afternoon, that's quite often the hottest part of the afternoon. So you really need to make sure that guests are catered for in that sense, and we're not going to have anybody fainting or anything. Now, I will add something on here. It's technically not cooling, but supplying bottles of water for before the ceremony and even the cocktail hour, even if it's just they're sitting in some ice buckets for people to come and grab themselves. If it's on a hot day, that is a non-negotiable. On my point of view, is non-negotiable, because it just helps people stay hydrated, and we don't want anyone fainting. Cooling in terms of inside the marquee as well. So there are a couple of ways that you can do this. Again, from your marquee company, they might have some fans, or they're essentially like an air conditioner as well that you can get. I would advise doing that. If you can get it from that marquee hire company, that it's included as in their package, that's even better. Now, something that some marquee providers have as well is a shade, which goes especially for a clear marquee. So you have a clear roof on your marquee, right? Now, through the day, that becomes a magnifying glass, and it really is a hothouse in there. Now, while your guests might not be in there, your staff and your vendor team are in there setting everything up. And yes, we're really good at working out timelines and things. So we're making sure everything is set up on time, but still looking as fabulous and fresh as we can get it. But I think there's also a part to play in this in terms of looking after them and their health and safety as well. So if your marquee company does have a shade, which is simply, it's like a light piece of cloth or canvas, or, I mean, they vary a little bit, that goes over the roof during the setup, that makes an absolute world of difference. And that means things like even your cutlery and glassware can all get set up on time. Because if you can have that cover, that is an expense. If it is additional, some marquee companies it's just included, but if it is an additional thing and you're getting married in the summer, strongly recommend getting that. Yeah, for the safety of, you know, your team setting it all up, but also so everything's nice and comfortable and people can actually pick up their forks and knives when they enter the marquee as well. So that cover is really important too. So they're just a few options in what you can do in terms of heating and cooling, but definitely consider that. And you need to consider, you know, all areas there too, like your ceremony, if it's in the heat of the day. But sometimes, for example, in autumn and in Victoria as well, our weather is really unpredictable. But in autumn, for example, here in Victoria, you can have a really like hot day, a nice day. So you're needing that ample shade at your ceremony. But once the sun sets, the night times are actually really cool. So you might need to still provide some heating, even some nice blankets so people can put them over their laps too. That's always a nice little touch too. But you might even need to provide both. So use your discernment in what time of year you're getting married and the location in Australia or all the world that you're getting married to, but really consider those things as well. Chat to your suppliers, lean on your suppliers. I will say that that's what they're there for. They're experts in the area that you've hired them for. So lean on them, ask them questions. And if you need a copy of how to plan your private property wedding, the free ebook is live on our website to download now. I'll put the link here as well. If you're following along on Instagram, there's links in there too. It's how to plan your perfect private property wedding. That's the ebook, completely free. And it goes through all of these things and more. It goes through even liability and legalities, noise restrictions. It goes through how to come up with a styling sort of concept with that, all the other things that you may or may not be considering but need to. It's your complete blueprint to that. Do yourself a favor, go and download that, and follow along on Instagram. We're always sharing lots of cool things over there, especially in the upcoming wedding season. We do have a few private property weddings, so keep your eye out for those. And yeah, I will see you in the next episode. Bye.